One of you open in prayer and we'll get started. Amen. We are slight today. Is something going on? Sleep. I've heard that. That's too bad. A lot of this low. I felt a little poorly myself last night, but a good night of sleep takes care of a lot. I want to talk a little bit more about evangelization today. The concept of that we had in Thessalonians of study to be quiet, mind your own business, work with your hands, pay your bills. And as with the Thessalonians and with the Philippians, their light would shine in the world, the individual light, so that with the Thessalonians particularly, Paul would say the gospel sounded forth from you into Macedonia and Achaia, the uttermost parts of the earth. Understand that is the normative thing. The apostles were witnesses. They went into all the world. Receiving the Great Commission, a very technical dimension of being witnesses. They established the foundation of the church. And then what the apostles wrote, both Paul and Peter argue for personal evangelism in the world where you live. The numbers that we were talking about in our world at Emmaus, that you contact, the faculty and the staff would make that jump considerably because of their, or should at least, make it jump considerably because of the world in which they live. We represent a big number. What was that number? 1,300, just by this little group. And in rather isolated life. That will jump considerably. If we would go back and go to the last day of your high school experience, that would have been a huge number, you realize. That is the emphasis that Peter makes. If any man asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, the initiative comes from the unbeliever who has observed our Christian lifestyle. I like that, don't you? Now, the lack therein, and the answer came right in this area, was if our Christian lifestyle is not very distinct, people will not notice it. When the divorce rate in the church is as high as it is in the pagan world, they won't notice. When their entertainment is our entertainment, they won't notice. When we get as drunk as they get drunk, they won't notice. They won't ask us any questions because it doesn't look like we have any answers. It calls for a sanctified lifestyle, like Peter puts forward in that passage before he says, and now if any man asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. That's one thing we have to improve in the Christian community, the lifestyle of the Christian. Do you grant that? Would you grant that we need to be a little holier than we are? So that we always need to be a little holier than we are. But it's an enormous gap nowadays, enormous. As a great preacher, Vance Havner, said, it's nice that Hollywood has cleaned up their movies so all the Christians can go to them now. You understand the sarcasm in that. And the fact is that's the case. Your generation, they say, compartmentalizes. You can go from, they say this, I don't know if this is true. Tell me if it is. They say you can go from singing holy, holy, holy to an unholy movie without even blinking. You compartmentalize in your life. That's what I do in a Bible college. That's what I do in church. This is what I do, and never the three shall meet. Do you think that's true of you? My feeling is it's not. People tell me I am deceived in that. What do you think? Do you compartmentalize to that extent? That you can sing the great hymns of the faith, be touched in a message in chapel, and then go do something really bad? Without blinking? No? There's a no. Are there any no's to that? That's not who we are. I hope that's not who we are. My feeling is that's not who we really are. But nonetheless, there are certain incidents, and you're aware of it as well as I am, even at this point in time, that happens. That compartmentalization of our lives. The sociologists say we really do that. Your generation can really do that. Oh yeah, see, that's what happens. The things don't mix. I even see that in classes, really. In a purely academic world, you will be learning one thing in this class that impacts on what I'm teaching, say, in the book of Hebrews. And I'll say, okay, reflect to me the order of the covenants in the Bible. That's important to understand Hebrews. And I asked that a couple times in class. I know you get taught that in Old Testament survey. But to take it out of that class and relate it to another class, they call it interdisciplinary relationships from one discipline to another. It's just not done very much. Do you understand? Do we think that way? Are we made that way? Wired that way, I think would be what you'd say. I'm afraid there's some truth to that. And that relates to Christian worldview. You've had that already, that integration of what we believe into the way we live out our life day by day is a critical issue. And people can observe that. Now, again, Christian lifestyle is not enough. All that will do is tell people we are religious, we're honest, we're hardworking, we're hospitable, we're friendly, we can be trusted. That will never get a person on the road to heaven off the road from hell. Our close friend neighbors said to Mills and me years back, when we get old, we want to love one another the way you do. That's nice. I took that as a compliment, but that's not going to get a person to heaven, is it? That's not enough, just to know that old folks can have a good relationship with one another. That's not enough. There's some place we have to get the gospel across. And they observe, and then they ask a reason for the hope. How come you can handle this? How come you have life put together? Because Christianity puts life together. That's what a Christian worldview is. We got an answer for everything. We have one answer for everything. What's the one answer? What? That's more spiritual than... There is one... What affects every way I live my life? There's one simple phrase. The old theologians got this a long time ago. To the glory of God. Right? That's your worldview. You're a father, mother, worker, policeman, carpenter, to the glory of God, whatever it is. That's our dominating worldview statement, to the glory of God, and that works out in great details in every aspect of life. So that's where witnessing starts, but it has to be verbalized. Give a reason for the hope that is in you. The worldview is lived particularly to have communication to the world in which we live so that we can communicate the gospel to them. It's the mentality that Paul has. We have the truth. Therefore, we are debtors to Jew and Gentile, to the civilized and the barbarians. Why are we debtors? Why are we? Any of you know the story about the lepers who were out in the field when God worked a miracle with Israel and the armies of the enemies were dead? Do you remember that story? Somebody relate that to us. What did they say? What did they do, first of all? They ate. They hadn't eaten. They were under siege. And they're lepers, and they're under siege twice. And they come on the armies with all their stores and supplies, and they're all dead bodies. First thing they did was eat. and they're having a good time. And then they said, do you remember? This is not good. The people in Jerusalem are starving. And we're making pigs of it. Well, a Jew wouldn't say I'm making a pig of myself. I'm making a whatever. I'm eating like I don't know what. And they had to go tell the people. We are indebted to people who don't have the good news. That was Paul's motivation. You know, we're debtors. I have this great news that rescues a person from eternal damnation. How can we keep it to ourselves? That's what Paul thought. Now, how does this concept of passive evangelism, lifestyle evangelism, when the other person initiates the contact, that's what Peter says, live this life, and if any man asks you a reason, give a reasoned defense, a hope in you, give a reasoned defense, with meekness and fear, let them off the hook if they don't want to talk about it. How does that impact on world missions? Passive, Petrine evangelism. How in the wide world are you going to ever make it to the mission field with Peter's emphasis and Paul's emphasis? Study, be quiet, work with your own hands, pay your bills, let your light, individual light, shine in the world. If any man asks you a question, how's that going to take you to the mission field? Well, it is, and that's really the right answer. That is our mission field to start with. And if we have that one right, which most of us don't, right? Most of us don't have that one right. Most of you grew up in families where very few of your neighbors even knew your stance biblically, right? Is that right? Most of you went through high school without many people knowing about where you stood spiritually. We don't have that mentality of there's our mission field. If I have that mentality, if we have it in home, if we have it in our church, if I have it in my heart, there are going to be a lot more missionaries. What we have to do at school, I mean, how many go to SMF? I mean, what's the total? How many would come? Yeah. 12 or 15. Is that sick? It's always been that way. All that is a proof that we come out of homes and churches that don't have a missions emphasis. The kids that come here the kids that are in SMF coming here have been thinking about missions long before they got here. They didn't catch that disease here. Did they? And you got to say, this is the best year of SMF communications we've ever had. I mean, it's wonderful. We all enjoy it. It's better than chapel most of the time, isn't it? You all cheer. It's still 12 to 15. And it happens in most everything. And it's because we don't feel that indebtedness that Paul talks about to the unsaved world. We have grown up in a rather worldly Christian lifestyle. All of us have. Well, I have to say I haven't. To be honest, my father was so evangelistic it was offensive. But that's a nice problem. It's a nice problem to have, to overcome being too strong. When I would take my dad to the doctor's office, I've told you this already, in his old age, he'd say to me in a real loud voice, "Dave, I wonder how many of these people are going to heaven when they die." And I go, "Oh, Dad." That's kind of blunt, isn't it? It is a good question. Well, most of us don't have a view across the street of unsaved folk, and could care less, frankly. if we do have that view, we're going to be looking across the street and in our neighborhood and in our school, and as we grow up into choosing careers, guess what's going to enter our feeble little minds? You know, if there's a church on every block in this town, and there's no church in X country within 100 miles of one another, maybe they need a little more gospel reach, do you think? If I have a mentality that looks at people as lost, if I sing the song legitimately, people need the Lord, if I have the compassion of Jesus that looks on people as sheep without a shepherd, in my narrow world that we mentioned, we'll be looking at them as people I can witness to. Live the life, verbalize it, drop the hints of Christianity. It's Wednesday night, we're having potluck at the chapel. They'll say, what? Sometime, and then bring them along. Not tonight, but bring them along, okay? That's the way it is. And if we have that mentality, this kind of concept where you put the Lord and sanctify the Lord in your heart, have a reason, live this lifestyle, there'll be a lot more missionaries. These are not conflicting concepts. Do you understand why I bring it up here? They are not conflicting. If I view my real world as missions, if I view my neighbors as my mission field, if I view them as people who are lost, who need the Savior, I will get, as I get a bigger view of life, have that same viewpoint to the world. And the next thing you know, I'll be picking up a letter from the Denny's in Africa, giving a report on what they're doing now that they finished school. That's kind of exciting. Okay? That's what we want to see happen. Be a lot more of it if we were personal evangelists to start with. However that shakes down for where you are. Any questions over that? Do you understand where I'm coming from? Sanctify the Lord God in your heart. Be ready to give a reason to anyone that asks you a hope. Look at that world of evangelism that we really live in, those 1,300 that we represent. And if we get that going, then that next circle of going into all the world will be there as well. And that's probably the way it should develop as you grow up. So it gets to be a bigger circle. Well, let's go from that to an easier thing to talk about. That's not it. I'll have to go back some for this one, I think. Money. Money in the church. I have a handout for you. In fact, I have two handouts. This one we'll do in an easy way. Let's do the fun thing first, and then we'll look at the charts. You know, you have to be a gorilla to open these things. I want each of you to take a card. Somebody give out, you can just flip these around. If somebody would get this, take one each. And then a couple of handouts for everyone. If a couple of you could help do that. We're going to talk about finances in the church. The Bible has a lot to say about it. A lot to say about it. Here's what the Apostle Paul will say. He's going to make a collection for the needy saints at Jerusalem. Do you hear this? Tell me the way Paul makes a collection for the needy saints at Jerusalem. You've had New Testament survey. You have had Corinthians, some of you. You may be in that now. What does Paul do in relationship to taking a collection for the needy saints at Jerusalem? Can somebody summarize his procedure? Number one, he makes the need known, doesn't he? You say, the saints in Jerusalem are starving to death. There's a great famine, and I'm taking a collection. Would you all grant he does that? He does that. And then he says to the Corinthians, how much would you like to pledge? Have any of you ever seen that done in your church? How much would you like to pledge? And the Corinthian church made some promises, didn't they? Now Paul goes away. He's extending his trip. He goes away and he writes to them. He said, now look, on the first day of the week when you're gathered together on every Sunday, you make sure you're making that collection. That's where we get the concept of weekly collections. 1 Corinthians 16. You make sure you're making that collection, Because I've been bragging all over Macedonia about your generosity and your pledges. Have you ever heard anybody do that in the church? Do you get this picture? Now, don't be embarrass me or yourself when I get back. Have that ready so that I can take it up to Jerusalem. He made the need known. He took pledges. He bragged on the total of the pledges, coerced them to give it, and told them not to be embarrassed when he got there, embarrass themselves or him, by not making their pledges. Do you think it's biblical to do that? It's got to be. That's what Paul did. And in the process, he said, look, don't give of necessity. Give willingly. Purpose first in your heart what you will give. And then give generously and give hilariously. It's a word. Doesn't exactly mean that anymore. But give joyfully. Not, oh my, I wish I weren't doing that. Okay? The Bible teaches that. This business about not making needs known is extra biblical. Hear me. It's extra biblical. It may be anti-biblical. The Apostle Paul did it. He even told people to do things that would benefit him. He will say, is it only Barnabas and I that have no right to lead about a wife? Are we the only ones that can't get married? Is it any big deal that if I give to you, Paul says of himself, spiritual things, you give me some money for doing that? I give you something that lasts forever, and you give me $2 that'll last for the Dunkin' Donuts. You know, is that a big deal? Don't we have a right? God has ordained that those who preach the gospel should live off the gospel. He said a lot that would benefit himself. If the Corinthians would have done it, he wouldn't have had to work with his own hands. He did that so they couldn't say you're doing it for the money. But he would say the labor is worthy of his reward. He will say that when it says the ox should eat some of the grain it treads, that's not written for the ox. You know why it's not written for the ox? The ox can't read. It's not written for the ox. It's written for us to see even an animal should be rewarded for working. So should a preacher. So should an elder. And so should missionaries. How many of you expect one day to go into Christian work? That's wonderful. Voluntary giving. You'll live off of voluntary giving. Do you feel bad about that? You shouldn't if you work. If you work. Now, I have in my hand from the U.S. Census Bureau the median family income. This is a couple years old, be about the same. Median family income per state. You want me to read off a couple of states? We'll do a family of four. This thing is based on a family of four in a state. Anybody have a state you're interested in? Joe, what state? You're from Massachusetts? Massachusetts, it's bad to live in New England. Do you know that? It's expensive. Average, in Massachusetts, four-person family, average income is $89,000 a year. Is that amazing? Maryland, my home state, is $94,000 a year. That's because it's close to Washington, D.C. All the people in Washington live in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, most expensive counties in the world, because they're living off of our tax money. It's the truth. $94,000. Anybody from Puerto Rico? That's figured in here. Average family income in Puerto Rico, four families, $25,000. That makes a statement. Let's do, anybody got a state you'd be interested in? I'd be glad. What's that? Wisconsin's pretty high, strangely enough. Wisconsin is 72,000. For the Midwest, it's amongst the highest. What state? New York. New York surprised me. It's lower than I thought it would be, 75,000. But New Jersey, anybody from New Jersey? New Jersey, just across the river, where a lot of New Yorkers live, is on my list someplace. Should be one ahead there. New York, New Mexico. Should be at the bottom of that. New Jersey, there it is. 77,000. Oh, that's wrong. 4-person, 94 in New Jersey. 94,000. That's expensive too. Minnesota, 81,000. Want to do Iowa? Okay. Iowa is 67,000. Average income, 4-person. The most expensive state is Connecticut. Joe, tell us why that is. Why is Connecticut so high? Connecticut is 98,000. A lot of coastline. A lot of bedroom people from New York, where the rich from New York would go to live, maybe? Yeah. So here on this sheet, I have figured the average income for a little lower than average in Iowa. This is the church financial template, a composite church population of 150. Most evangelical churches are still under 100. They're small. So I kicked it up a little, 150. This is about the size of ACC. Broke it down into families, 30 families of 4. Makes 120 people. And then 30 singles, that's 30, a total of 150. You with me? How we're figuring this? Now, if we take the average income in Iowa for a 4-person family, which is what we're dealing with, that's 30 times 65,000. That gives us $1,950,000 coming in through that group. And for the singles, people like yourself, probably employed, however, but single people who aren't married, would drop them 25,000, which would be reasonable. 1,200,000. A church the size of ACC would have $3,150,000 total financial worth in the course of a year. Does that seem big to you? High? This would be normative. These are just based on averages. Now, where ACC and churches associated with the school are, we have a lot of school personnel and student personnel, which generally fall below the average. I finished my income tax last night, and I guarantee I fall below the average. That's just the way it is, way below. It's beautiful. I feel guilty when I write my check for the government. But if this were just a normal Dubuque church, evangelical, the same size as ACC, a tithe would be $315,000 a year for the church budget. Does that sound big? That's huge. Do you realize what you could do if in a church of 150 people, just average income? I mean, that's average for a 4-person family in this state. If in that church of this composite, and this is a small church, there'd be a budget of $315,000. What could you do with that? Well, you have to pay for the building. Well, it's only a couple thousand. That's $24,000 a year. You still have $29,000 to deal with. Expenses of the building, it'd be high if that were $1,000. No, you have $290,000 to deal with. Well, let's hire some staff. You could get a half a dozen people working full time at the average income. A half dozen would be high, but you could get a number. And you'd have missions that you could support generously. What's the hook in this story?
The number you're starting with.
No. The number of people is right. What number's wrong? The tithe, right? What's that? No, this is average income. What they cite is in the middle of the income in a four-person family in Iowa. Now, I am granting that we're low, and our church is represented by school folk. I grant that, but I'm saying about Dubuque Bible Church that isn't that. Or Hope, which would be much bigger than this. You're talking about the possibility of millions of dollars in a town like this coming into church life. If we would tithe. And therein is the hook. And that's why I have a little card. Want to take a little survey today. This will be fun. This will be anonymous. I will collect these. And then we'll see what happens. I want you on this card to put down what you give per week in the church you attend. And then we'll collect them. Don't put your name on it. Write it down. We'll collect them, and I'll tell you what we give as a class with a point in view, okay? Put down what you give each week. Pardon? I'll take either of those. I'll take either of those. And you raise a good point. It's not all church giving. Our giving is not all church giving. But that's a pretty good dodge. Our giving is not much giving, is what the problem is.
So if you supported a kid through like Compassion or World Vision, would that count?
Yeah, that would count. If you do something like that. Whatever you use, however you give, break it down on a weekly basis. What do you give per week to anything called Christian? Now, this is not to get the pizza to entertain your floor. Okay? And when you pass it in upside down so nobody can look at it, okay? Now, that shouldn't have taken that long, so you have that number. Pass them to the center. Somebody collect them in the center aisle for me, would you? Pass them to the center, collect them. Somebody go right up the middle and collect all these. And then we'll just have a brief review of it. This will be very instructive. Any of you make any predictions? I guess that. I watch the collection bag. I don't really watch it. But when it hits a college row, it goes a lot quicker. You understand? It's like an express. And you realize, one of the amusing things is watching deacons or people taking collections get mixed up. Do you enjoy doing that? It's kind of fun. Kind of fun to watch what happens. Here we go. I got a whole essay on this. 10%. Okay. Blank card. Used to be 0. Used to be in home church about 10%. 0. Slim to none. That's my diet, slim to none. 0. $5. 0. 0. 3. 15. Ooh. I'm going to trace that number. 10. 5. Nothing on average. That's good. Nothing on average. 7. It's a nothing. Nothing. 10. 30 per week. 5. 15. 0 to $1.50. 30 a week. 10 to 15. 5. 18. That's a precise one. Nothing. 0. Nothing. 5. 40. 0, 5. 10, 10, 10, 25, 15, tithing regularly, 10, 0, 10, 0, 5, 15. That was higher than average. How do you think that is? What do you think? A lot of zeros. Well, you should. That'll always work. If a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. That's a verse from Scripture, isn't it? Do the people who don't work ever buy pizzas? You get money from someplace. You get money from someplace. You're folks, that's okay not to work. Somebody's paying a bill or you're living off Uncle Sam. I think that generally won't stand up. But I understand that. A number of years ago, when I was an elder, we addressed this issue particularly, and we did some figuring out. We said that to meet the needs of our assembly, an older married couple should contribute about $50 a week. Young marrieds, probably 20. And students, we said 0 to 5. That 0 to 5 would make a difference in the whole totality of church life. Now, that was an attempt at being rather direct in it all. Okay, are students poor? You probably have more discretionary shekels in your jeans now than you will in coming years. Your bills are rather localized at this point. You think it's hard to live, but one day you will buy a house. Do you know that? If you buy a house for about $100,000, you know how much you end up paying for that house? Have you ever figured that out? Don't ever figure that out. When you take a 30-year mortgage, which is normative, we take on the chapel, we had a 12-year mortgage, and you make a monthly payment, and you forget how many months you're paying $1,000 a month. It goes on forever. And the house ends up costing you 3 times as much as it's listed for. You all know that by now, don't you? That's the way it is. So you get the house going, or the apartment going, and the car going, and groceries going, and you're making it, and then your wife will say to you, "What's the color on the little test? It's pink, is it? I don't know. It's pink. We're going to have a baby." There's a great commercial right now on television. The wife makes her announcement to the husband, "We're going to," and he goes out to his car. Have you seen this? It's a great commercial. It's a real hot little 2-door car, and he grabs the bumper in the back and pulls it, and it becomes a 4-door sedan, and now we have room for the kid. Well, it's not quite that easy. You can't pull on the bumper, So I'm saying you probably have discretionary use of funds pretty well right now. And someplace in there's a 10% hiding that might belong to Jesus, don't you think? When do you start doing that? My parents wanted us to do that, so they gave us money to put in the collection bag early on in life. Put this in. This is for you, but put it in. Get in the habit of doing that. And my father would do that to my grandkids. "Here, put this in the collection." And then he'd ask them, "Did you do it?" "Yeah." Well, then he gave them the same thing back just to encourage the giving, It's kind of a neat thing. Get the habit going. Do you know the charitable organizations are frightened with the date 2020. Why might they be frightened with that date?
Baby boomers.
Yeah, by then I'll be dead. My generation will be gone. That's a generation that gave. Your generation doesn't give, you keep it. And that won't work in church life. Every church will know that people don't come close to tithing. And I'm not saying tithing is the standard either. It's whatever you have. It's the mite, the little bit, or the big amount. And I'm saying I understand your students, but it would be very hard to convince me that some of you regularly can give nothing to any work of God, that you got to keep it all. Would you grant that's a legitimate conclusion? It really is. And we live so high on the hog. One year I went through the same process, and one of the students said that too. We're poor. We had a family, in fact, that was supported by Charles Ryrie from Mexico to come to school here. He likes our school, I'm glad to say. We'll have to cut that out, by the way. And he was from Mexico. And we did the same exercise. And some of the students said, well, we're students. We don't have anything. He came up to me after class and said, Mr. Glock, could I talk to the class tomorrow? I want to tell them about what being poor is. And he wasn't a poor person. He was rather well off. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know what not having is, right? If we own a house and drive a car, we're in the 93 up percentile of wealth in the world. How many of you grew up in a home your folks owned and you had a car? That's all of it. They add this. If you have a hobby, that kicks you up about 5 levels. If you play golf, you're in the top 5% of all of humanity on this earth. I have the model railroad layout. I used to. That's a hobby. If you have money to spend on a hobby, on CDs, on concerts, or the extra pizza, or whatever like that, we're in the top 5% of income in the entire world. That's who we are. The Western church should have no financial problems. No Bible college should ever have financial problems. No outreach ministry should ever have financial problems with the millions of wealthy Christians that there are, right? Why do we have problems? Well, it comes right down to all the zeros here. The $3, the $5. I understand. I went to school too. And every dollar is important. But we must get in the habit of giving. So that when 2020 comes, you'll be a giving generation. My father and mother taught me this, and I think it is really the truth. You should be personally frugal and publicly generous. That doesn't mean making a show. It means giving to others. For yourself, you're frugal. For other people, the world at large, you are generous. Personally frugal. Make the Indian ride the buffalo. You know what that means. There's a nickel, an Indian buffalo nickel, and you squeeze it so hard that the Indian on one side is on top of the buffalo on the other side. Okay, make the Indian ride the buffalo. Be personally frugal, but with one another, with the world at large, be generous. When the kid comes to the door and says, I'm selling cookies. Your brother came to the door when your mother scolded him. Came to the door, at Christmas they said, I bought some CDs from him, Reflections, Christian music. I play them a ton. When somebody knocks at the door, for the first couple, buy it. You can't buy from the whole high school class, obviously. But, be generous with other people. With yourself, be tight. It's a good rule of thumb. I grew up that way. It's a wonderful way to grow up. And be that way. Be generous with other people. You can do that, and you need to train yourself to do it. We have a responsibility. Now, these are the biblical ones. We'll look at those next hour. Where are we on quizzes? I'm a little mixed up. Some of you who keep track, are we on? I think I gave an extra one is the problem.
On the 15th, we should have a quiz on finances or evangelism.
Which one was the last one? Was it quiz 7 or quiz 8? It was our 8th quiz. So we only need 2 more. So let's not have one. Let's see, we are on the 13th now. Let's skip 8. And on the 18th, we'll do 9. We've already done 8, really. We'll do 9 on the 18th, so there won't be a quiz until the 18th, okay? And that'll be over evangelism and finances. Okay, that's where we are. You have a great day. And remember, Sunday when the collection basket comes by, 100%, okay? I mean 100% giving, not 100% given.